My name is Anthony Posada. I am a supervising attorney in the Legal Aid Society's Community Justice Unit, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you all about our experiences with community organizing and putting people together and working with groups when it comes to challenging, exposing, and raising awareness around New York City's gang policing practices. And I'm here with my colleague, Josmar.
Hey everyone, my name is Josmar Trujillo. I'm an organizer at the Policing and Social Justice Project at Brooklyn College. Been lucky enough to be working with Anthony and a bunch of other great people here in New York City around issues with the gang database and gang policing. We're really excited and happy to talk with you all today.
One of the things that we wanted to do as an introduction was show a video that shows one of the instances where we were actually doing some of the organizing that we're going to be talking about, and also helps to tie in a lot of the overall issues that we have been struggling and pushing to change here in New York City.
Yep. And I'm going to just share my screen and share the video with you all. It's a few minutes long. Just to give you context, it came a few years ago as the Legal Aid Society and Anthony and Victor were doing, and Jermaine were doing a lot of great organizing and workshops and a FOIL campaign that the video goes into a little bit, and Anthony will explain. But this took place in, I think it was East New York or Brownsville, right? I think East New York.
East New York.
Yeah. So I'll share my screen and share with you guys all, and then we'll pass it back to Anthony. 1 second.
Down when you leave, you go down the block and you see your boy. You go, oh, what up, Rad? Da, da, da. Yo, Pee-wee ain't get out yet? Nah, I'm about to post a post on him. Hashtag free Pee-wee. You know there's a cop watching that? And now that you know Pee-wee, because Pee-wee's the head crip dude, you in a gang database.
Street gangs take on different forms. They are similar in that they tend to be motivated by greed and a twisted sense of honor.
No one needs to live in fear in New York City. No one should have to worry about their child or their elderly mother or father walking down the block at night.
After the tragic murder of 15-year-old Bronx teen Junior Gusman Feliz, New York local press helped the NYPD label large swaths of the city as gangland. New York City. Being labeled a gangster doesn't just dehumanize our understanding of the people who live here. It also helps the NYPD circumvent the ban on stop and frisk once more. Hence the nickname Stop and Frisk 2.0.
I live in Bronxville, and I'm constantly seeing now on the rag that you got 3 and 4 DTs jumping out their cars, just walking up on young boys and searching them.
Today, we join Victor Dempsey and Anthony Posada from LAS's Community Justice Unit at Man Up for a training session on their FOIL initiative.
We say gang, we think something's going on, right?
I don't have a fight because once it goes to the federal court, my God, he doesn't even have the bail the minute they say gang related. They don't want to hear nothing.
But not just that, we're talking about Cruz, the source part of Operation Crew Cut.
Today, much of what the violent crime we face not only comes from traditional criminal groups, but also from smaller groups, often linked by their neighborhood. We refer to these as crews.
Just crews, just motorcycle clubs, just a group, anybody, exactly.
But if you're just standing around the corner and the cops, say for instance, grab him and you're standing there, they would actually take your name and throw it in that database? Get out.
So we talk about our youth. How do we empower them? We explain to them, this is what they're doing to you. We explain to them social media, Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. Down when you leave and you go down the block and you see your boy, you go, oh, what up, Rad? Da, da, da. Yo, Pee-wee ain't get out yet? Nah, I'm about to post a post on him. Hashtag free Pee-wee. You know there's a cop watching that? And now that you know Pee-wee, because Pee-wee's the head crip dude, you in a gang database. I hear you guys, I get it, you've never been locked up, but like Anthony said, you don't have to do anything criminal to be put on a gang database, which is gonna criminalize you.
He's right. You don't have to commit a crime to be on a gang database. You don't even have to be suspected of committing a crime. does that happen? Let's take a closer look.
Anyone can openly admit to being in a gang for whatever reason it is. Maybe it was a stop, maybe it was kind of accident, maybe bragging about it. We don't know. Reliable resource they use is actually school safety. Now we're talking about our high schools, junior high schools, where our kids are. I'm actually going to use a scenario that they use in a hearing. If a police officer gets called to a school for a fight, someone wants to press charges on another young man for assault possibly. While if we're making that arrest, a school safety officer or a teacher basically sets him on the side, hey, this young man's part of such and such a group. They're saying that they take that into consideration with making that arrest. Now, let's say the case is moving on with the young man, goes to prosecution, they talking to the DA about the case. Oh, so who is this young man? Talk to me about it. They want to get bio on or background to see how heavy that penalty may potentially be. But the most thing they know is he's part of a gang, he's part of the crew.
These people don't even know him. They just tell the story and they indict him. If he wants to go to trial, he wants to go to trial. You're talking 50 to 100 years. These young people are getting hundreds of years off of BS.
So there's one little fight that happened in school that probably could have been pulled aside and just talked about. Now he's labeled not only a gang member, but that's holding the weight on how they're prosecuting that case.
But so far, the only way to know if you're in the gang database is when prosecutors present it as evidence against you in court. And by then, it's already too late. The only way to find out if you're placed on a gang database outside of court is through a Freedom of Information Act request. Freedom of Information Law, FOIA for short, provides the public with the right to access certain government records. So, in order to help fight what LAS calls a breach in constitutional rights, in 2018, the Legal Aid Society launched a do-it-yourself campaign for community members, which allows them to submit FOIA requests to NYPD. The main focus of the campaign is to inform and empower New Yorkers on the NYPD's use of the gang database.
I want to engage all of you to submit actual FOIA requests, like right now. We'll fill them out, I'll notarize them, take them back to the office, we'll submit them. We will be following up with each and every one of you to let you know what they said, which will more than likely be first the denial, and then we'll follow up with an appeal.
Over 300 FOIA requests have been submitted since the start of this program, and all of them, 100%, have been outright denied by the NYPD. Over 98% of the people named in the database have been Black or Latinx New Yorkers, a racial undertone that isn't missed by the LAS. This is the Prince Joshua Veto Community Center. It's a newly opened state-of-the-art facility offering a gym, music studio, entertainment space, and computer rooms. The Prince Joshua Veto Center is ran by Man Up and Good Shepherd Services. Community members, including brother A.T. Mitchell, formed Man Up following the tragic death of an 8-year-old, Deshaun Hill, in 2003. It was their way of ending the cycle of gun violence in East New York. 2 years later, the organization officially formed as a not-for-profit. They later became part of the New York City Crisis Management System's Cure Violence program, employing a public health model to address the issue of gun violence in communities. The work of violence interrupters like Man Up is to mediate conflicts and to reach residents who have a high risk of committing gun violence, as well as those who have been impacted by it.
The police came in to testify that the reason they do this is because of gun violence. And who is working to change gun violence through a public health approach right now? Who is? You all are. You are. You all are the alternative, the way to go, what should be supported. Is violence occurring, right? Are people hurting other people in our communities? Yes, I know it. At the same time, do we agree that a full hammer should be dropped over this entire community so that they are destroyed and depleted? No.
Side note, law enforcement and community organizers often refer to violence interrupters as credible messengers. These are men and women returning to their communities to give back after being impacted by systems of oppression like gun violence. Studies have shown that credible messengers and violence interruption groups like Man Up have dramatically reduced the number of violent and gang-related crimes in New York City.
More of this. Yes. More centers. Can these centers be replicated everywhere in New York City, right? They can, but they're not. There's money for it, but why doesn't it come here?
Very interesting because it brings awareness. And as a life coach, I can use this information to deal with the young brothers and sisters that we work with in our neighborhood vocational corps.
It's important for our young people, even from babies in elementary school, to be aware of this very important issue. As our job as an organization is to inform others, that's how the word gets spread out, and that's how we become more cautious about the things that we do in the street, about who we talk to, our surroundings of that sort.
So just having this knowledge, it'll help me just, spread the word to them to let them know what's going on in our neighborhood.
If you want to find out
Thanks,
who's on
Josmar.
the database, submit a request. Follow the link below for more information.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Josmar. So to give even more detail about what we all just saw, it was a workshop that took place at one of the cure violence organizations that we work with here in the Community Justice Unit at Legal Aid. And what we were doing was bringing part of the Foil Yourself campaign, which was a campaign that we started back in 2018 to help community members submit freedom of information law requests to find out if they had been listed in the gang database. While the video starts there, I want to take it a step back so that I can tell you all how we got connected with this work and why we even started the campaign in the first place. So here in New York City, what we were seeing with relation to gang policing practices was this full-fledged assault from the NYPD that had started shortly after stop and frisk had been ruled unconstitutional. And it was called Operation Crew Cut, and it basically unleashed the full force of the NYPD against communities of color that were then subjected to these heavily militarized gang raids and takedowns. Some of the takedowns reached incredible, like huge, large numbers of people being arrested in one single instance, up to 120 in coordination with other federal agencies. So that's going on in the background. And at the same time, the city has the Cure Violence groups, and the groups are working with people in the community who are the same people to some extent that the NYPD is actually keeping under surveillance, putting into the gang database, and ultimately arresting and hitting them with large charges, with conspiracy, with RICO charges. We were being asked in the Community Justice Unit to go to the communities shortly after a gang raid had happened. And so the NYPD would call them debrief sessions. We would go to these debrief sessions, and the idea was for us to be able to offer people in that community services shortly after the raid. But what we saw happening was that it was really this show where the NYPD would go out with their detectives, sometimes with the lead prosecutor on the case, and they would just tell the community who had just been subjected to this, right, this incredible full force of the police, that they had just been done a favor because the police got rid of the worst in their neighborhood. So they would come and justify what had happened. They would come and say, look, we're using actually something that we call precision policing. We're being very precise. We're going only after the people who are causing harm in your community, and never offering a sort of more detailed reasoning behind, well, actually, we've been surveilling this community. We have been watching you all. We have been using units to stop and harass the youth in this community, to ask them what are their ties, who they hang out with, what do they do. No talk about how they had a full ongoing effort where they have a unit dedicated to just monitoring the social media of people to include them or list them as potential gang members. No talk about that. No talk about how they could have played a role in being preventative or in intervening, but rather just like, we did this massive raid, and therefore you should be okay with what we just did. And also, here are these services in case you need them. So after going to all over the city, from the counties here in New York City, in the Bronx, and Harlem, in Manhattan, in Brooklyn, we just saw this pattern that people in the community had this desperate need to know more, that what had just happened and the form in which they had been terrorized, that they needed more support, and support that went beyond needing helping with their housing, in case they were facing eviction as a result of the raid, or if they needed assistance with getting their doors that had been knocked down to be put back on and repaired. Any and all of those things. What we saw was really missing was an active component to actually inform people about the ongoing policing mechanism that was happening that contributed to the gang raid in the first place. And so what we saw was, we took a page from another technique that a group here in New York City, the Asian American Legal Defense Fund, had done shortly after 9/11. And what they did was that they went into communities that were being surveilled, particularly Muslim communities, and they started to help people submit FOIA requests. And so we said to ourselves, we can do something similar. We can create a place where people can submit the FOIA requests. And what that would allow us to do is then reach out and go out and educate people about the existence of the database, which was the first thing. And the second one was to empower them to know if in fact they had been labeled. And the other piece there, the kind of like the way it all connected back to challenging the raid in the first place, was that if somebody was actually placed in the database, if they got an affirmative response from these FOIA requests, then we could help them. We could challenge that inclusion. We could at least try to get more information, more than just a, yes, you're in the database, but to get information that would tell us, well, where did that come from? Did you just use one of the criteria that is racist and overly broad, such as me living in a certain location or hanging out with certain people or wearing certain colors? Like, what was it that gave rise to my inclusion? And so I'm just going to do a quick share here of what we started. So we put together this website, and the idea was, right, it would tell people what our effort was about. We would explain to them what a FOIA request is, how do people apply. It would also tell them why we want to request this information, right? So that people could know that we weren't just creating our own database, but that what we were trying to do overall was challenge the policing practice around gang and gang enforcement. So people could come to this website and hit submit a FOIA request, which would take them to this page. They'd fill out this information and then they would sign. And so we started doing this, and we started to connect with more people. The workshop that you saw in the video at Man Up was one of many, many workshops that we did throughout the city. We would go outside of the Cure Violence Network in New York City, which is already a pretty big network in itself that represents 23 organizations throughout the 5 boroughs. But we would go to other stakeholders that were also providing, let's say, youth services, or that were working in communities that we knew were being surveilled, monitored, or that their youth were experiencing harassment by units in the NYPD that were working hand in hand with the gang division. And so the going out into communities and helping people submit the FOIA requests would then allow us to inform people of the existence of it. And you would see some reactions from people consistently, like the one you saw in the video from some of the brothers and sisters, where they were saying, wow, I can't believe this is actually a thing. Or like, I did not know that this was happening. Are you being serious? And once we would explain to them, yes, this is an ongoing thing, we would go there and even show them some of the indictments from some of the prior cases that had taken place, and show them word for word how they had taken content that people had put on their social media to use it against them in the prosecution of their cases. So that effort is going on, and I have the pleasure of not just being like, well, one person shop, but I was working at the time with some other community organizers that were in this unit. Victor Dempsey is one of them, who you saw in the video. Jermaine Thompson, you didn't see in the video, but he's also part of the unit. And the idea was to go as far and as wide as we could, to talk to the youth, to talk to community members, to talk to moms and uncles and everybody else who was in the community who we knew should have this information and or whose family was being impacted. And then that started to pick up steam in the form of getting noticed by the elected officials in that community, in that district, who wanted to know more about what we were doing. So that would give us an opportunity to then go into these meetings with council members to tell them, look, we've been doing this. This is what we've been finding out, that we have this ongoing effort happening. That would then work alongside another strategy, which was the media strategy, where we would also put out some opinion pieces. We put out the videos some of the videos that you, well, one of them that you just saw, but that's part of a series of other videos that were put together, where the same people in the video are the same community members that we were working with to get this information into. What we saw overall and what we knew coming in was that the NYPD had this terrible FOIL process. And by that, I just mean like they would deny every single request that we would submit. So every single request that we'd help submit would come back denied. They would basically raise one of the exemptions saying, well, no, you don't have access to this information, or no, we can't give you this information. And so we started to push back on that, and we started to make our practices much more, I guess, tailored to attack what they were saying was an exemption under freedom of information law. And then we would start to appeal those decisions. And then we actually started to get some cases where they would deny, they would say, yes, we have information, but we're not going to give it to you. And so what we did with those instances was submit another form of suing a city agency, which is called an Article 78 proceeding. And so we actually sued them several instances for the denial of that information. And even though that was dragged out by the New York City Police Department Law Department, we would nonetheless ultimately prevailed in court, and they had to turn over those documents. And ultimately what we saw was what we had feared, which was that the people that wanted to get this information were being kept inside of this database without their knowledge, without an ability to challenge that they were included, and that the basis for that inclusion was that they had at one point or another been seen with certain people in their neighborhood, or that they had posted certain things on their social media. And so it confirmed a lot of what we knew and feared, but it also helped to put us in a position where now, at least, there's a larger coalition, which the Legal Aid Society is a part of, and Josmar is also on the coalition. It's called the Gangs Coalition. And so the Gangs Coalition to me is like representative of all the work that has been going on to help keep people informed, engaged about what's happening. A lot of the people that we also encountered when doing the workshops, when connecting with them, when going across the city, was that they wanted to be involved. Some of them who had been impacted by gang policing practices, whether because they had been subjected to a raid or had actually been incarcerated, wanted to play a role and speak to the youth. They wanted to be more active in this overall fight to dismantle the NYPD's gang database. And so for us, some of the lessons learned about the last 3 years in doing this work is how important it was to not just sit in our offices and say, well, there's this problem happening, this is how we have to tackle it, right? No, if you hear from what I just shared, we started by being in the community. We started by noticing what was happening in the community, which was our introduction with the debriefs, seeing that those patterns playing out, talking to people, connecting with people, finding out other ways that we could support them, and then thinking, well, like, let's start this effort that can support the community and can support the other groups. By that time, the Gangs Coalition had not been formed, but there was a loose group of people who were dedicated to working around this issue, who played key roles in doing a lot of things that I just mentioned. Like, I didn't shoot that video by myself, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of people behind the scenes who were also a part of this. And so the lessons played out for me, right? Because I'm coming into this space as a former public defender, was that I didn't come in that format of saying, well, this is the theory of the case and this is what we have to do and this is how we're going to get the best outcome. It was rather saying, how can we take what's happening, bring people together, work to find other solutions, and think creatively, think in ways that we don't have to think of on a regular basis if we're just doing our legal work, and start to push that conversation. You all saw in the video a snippet of a city council hearing that took place, which was kind of the first time that the NYPD had actually had to come out of their empowered position or their ivory tower to speak about what they were doing, to put it on the public record. And all of that is really the result of all of the organizing that had to take place to get them to that position. And that organizing was part of rallies, council member hearings, a lot of those forums and workshops, raising the importance of this conversation, because on the other end, all we were hearing was just, well, this is good, this is justified, we need to do this, right? This is what the media outlets or the NYPD was making sure to push out on a consistent basis, which was to say, we need this tool, and this tool helps us do our jobs. And we would push back and counter, well, you have a tool that is used for the purposes of mass criminalization, that is over-inclusive, that is disproportionately impacting people, right? As you saw in the video, it's 99% Black and brown. And so constantly pushing at that was what I learned the most about the importance of community organizing when it comes to this work, and making sure that people in the communities most impacted are, one, getting the information and knowing that it's happening, and also being asked to play a part in changing that narrative and changing that overall tactic from the NYPD. And so those are some of the few things that stand out for me that I wanted to share with you all. The website is still ongoing. We're still helping people submit FOIL requests. We've hit some barriers as of late, especially with the pandemic, because the NYPD changed a lot of their FOIL practices. If they were worse before, now they're just completely terrible and unreliable. But we haven't stopped, and we haven't given up that effort, and we're still connecting with people, obviously less so in person, but still keeping up the workshops going. And so those are some of the few things that I just wanted to mention about the lessons that I've learned in the work to change NYPD gang policing practices and to connect with the community to empower them. So, Josmar.
Great, thanks, Anthony. By the way, before I even start, if anyone has any questions specifically for Anthony, if you want to put them in the chat, that way you don't have to wait until I'm done to ask that question. So I'll just give everybody just a minute. If anyone has any questions, just throw them in the chat specific to Anthony. All right. So I'll start. I'll actually, what I'll do is, here's a question from Al Ellis. Is there a FOIL for the state of California? Anthony, do you know?
I'm not aware of one, but I know that we here in New York City constantly point to California as a source where there is actually a state-ran database, like the state has legislation around this, and people there get notice. They get notice and they get an opportunity to appeal their inclusion in the database. I don't know if it's just like that smooth because I'm not familiar with the practices in California, but everything that we did throughout these years that we have been doing, right, like, is to say that, first of all, we don't want a database to begin with. We're not trying to make it better. We don't want a database that informs people, but here we don't even have, people don't even get told, unlike in California where there wouldn't be a need to submit a Freedom of Information law request because I believe you will already be told if you're placed on it.
Yep. And just also, I want to put it out there that, Anthony and I are based in New York City, so we'll talk from what we know about in New York City. But obviously, especially some of you from the West Coast have been dealing with gang injunctions, takedowns, overbroad gang policing in general for a very long time. So I will put that out there as just an understanding of New York City kind of being a little bit behind the curve in terms of how we've had to deal with what's happened in the last 6-7 years in New York City with gang policing. So keep that in mind. So again, my name is Josmar Trujillo. I came into this work as an organizer and also as a writer. I was really interested in using my writing to try to help movement work, organizing work, but also tell the stories of people whose voices are normally ignored or marginalized. And one of the first instances of me being, I guess, made aware of what happens to you when you are alleged to be a gang member was in 2014. I live on the east side of Harlem in El Barrio, Spanish Harlem, and on the east side. And then on the west side, there was a huge gang takedown that led to or culminated in 103 indictments. It was at the time the biggest gang takedown in the history of New York City. And I think like the biggest operation that happened since the Prohibition era. And what happened was basically a militarized shock and awe, you could say like a psychological warfare operation, because all of the news cameras in New York City, or most of them, all of the major media were all invited ahead of time to this grand operation. So all of the news people are already made aware of this event. It was about maybe 5-6 o'clock in the morning. Battering rams were used to knock down people's homes. I think over 400 police officers went into 2 public housing developments, the Grand Houses and the Manhattanville houses and some of the surrounding buildings, and did this large scale operation. It was kind of like, I guess, if you think of like George Bush in the Iraq War, like that mission accomplished moment where they have this big thing and then they have the big media event afterwards. I remember it not just because I lived in not too far on the east side of Harlem, but also because it was the biggest thing in the news at the time. And that was the first time that I had really heard of this idea of like a gang takedown. Now, to be clear, New York City has had gang takedowns before to a lesser degree. And definitely there was never kind of like the focus and the spectacle, as long as I've been in New York City, quite as much as what began in 2014. And there I actually met a father, an amazing advocate, organizer, anti-violence worker. He always says he wears many hats. Taylon Murphy, who actually, he spoke, I think yesterday on one of these conferences, and he had a son who was included in the takedown. But he was a little different from a lot of the other parents whose kids or whose children were included and indicted, in that his daughter, who had been tragically killed a few years before, was actually used as pretty much the main justification for the operation, because she was killed as part of inter-community violence between Grand Manhattanville. Now, Grand Manhattanville, this is kind of like an old story, are 2 housing developments relatively close to each other, and there had been feuds going on for years on and off. That's a story as old as, I think, the public housing. So what was different in this case is that it led to this moment where New York City decided to say, okay, we're going to start taking these moments of violence, and instead of prosecuting or policing the traditional way, we're going to expand what we're doing, and we're going to cast this huge net on people. And it was a net that led to 103 indictments, or 103 people being indicted. One of them was Taylon's son. And so Taylon, whose daughter was killed and whose daughter's death was used as a justification for this, saw kind of both sides, because he also had a son who was Chicken's brother, who was indicted in this, and who Taylon said he wasn't the person that they were saying that he wasn't doing the things that they were saying that he was doing. So he kind of had a very unique perspective on it. And one, he was anguished and suffering from the loss of his daughter, which for a lot of people makes them feel a sense of, yeah, like let's do what we have to do to bring people to justice. But he also had this other sense where his son was being unfairly and unjustly wrapped into this conspiracy indictment. And so he saw both sides of it. And so there I talked with him, and I actually went to a couple of the court dates for some of the people who were indicted. And I just talked to other parents. And I was doing it as a writer, as an organizer, but I was also really just interested in as a person, as a father myself, to just talk to people and say, you know, how do you feel about what's going on? The use of conspiracy was something that was new to me. I'm not a lawyer. I didn't even know people could be arrested for the actions of other people or for the actions of a group or just for association. That to me was like something that I saw in like mafia movies. So when I talked to parents and I kind of got a sense from them that this was unfair, people were being overcharged at the least, or in some cases outright wrongfully convicted across the board on all charges. So I kind of got a sense that there was something different about this version of injustice versus other forms of injustice, like just someone being arrested unfairly or being harassed by police, or kind of the things that we've come to unfortunately expect from police. So this was a much bigger scale operation. So from that takedown, which was 7 years ago, last month, we started to keep in contact, and I met other people who were interested in or at least outraged by some of these things. 22 months later, in the Bronx, there was a bigger takedown, and the 2014 takedown was the biggest in New York City. This one beat that record, and it led to the indictment of 120 people. And this was called, or it's known as the Bronx 120 case. This was a case that was a little different, and it was prosecuted by the federal government. It was similarly a media spectacle. We met mothers. Actually, the day after it happened, I decided to go up there like immediately after the takedown. I think actually the same day, because I think it was an early morning operation and I heard about it and I happened to be free, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go up there to see what's going on. I went out there and there was an armored car. I want to say almost like a tank in the middle of the projects. There were people kind of like frantically going back and forth, I think trying to get information about people that had been arrested. This was a takedown that was so broad that there were like fathers and sons. There were 2 generations of people who had been taken out in this case. And so there were people there concerned about their children, and there were people there concerned about their spouses, their uncles. And when I went and talked to people, I was also interested in saying, hey, is the things that are saying on TV, the things that the police are telling the reporters to tell the public about your community, is this true? I wanted to ask that question as a writer, right? And people told me that no, that the community was actually pretty safe, compared to years past. And I remember looking at the crime stats for that development, and they were much safer than they had been 10 years prior, 15 years prior. It was a relatively safe community as far as public housing in New York City goes. And that was also my kind of sense, my first sense of like how much sensationalism goes into packaging the whole gang narrative and the whole we have to get every gang member off the street narrative. And I talked to people there. I met a couple of great mothers, a couple of 4 amazing moms. I mean, there were more people, and they actually held a rally the next day. It was a great example of not seasoned organizers, just everyday people immediately rallying the same day because what had happened to them was so wrong and so traumatic that it was automatic to just hold a rally and just make signs with magic markers right away. Whether or not even the press showed up, it was just a matter of like us or them having to say, this was wrong and what happened to my son was wrong. And also they knew that this was a federal case and these were some very serious charges. So there was a sense of urgency, there was a sense of outrage, there was a sense of, I have to do something. I don't know what to do. Lord knows it's hard enough to fight the federal government, but now I need to fight the media and the sense of public perception that's being dispensed around my loved one, you know, and so just talking to them really kind of opened my eyes to like the bigger problem. One is that these are communities that have been historically underfunded. I don't even know if there's enough words to explain it. Underfunded, under-resourced, put in positions to fail through kind of every aspect of life. And then crime is being used as a way to justify now the full weight of not just local prosecutors and police, but police and several federal agencies to come into that public housing development and treat it as a war zone, treated it like Afghanistan or Iraq. And so talking to them and getting a sense from them about who their kids were, people I had, young men and people I had never met and may never meet because some of them unfortunately are serving long sentences. Getting a sense from the moms about how hard it was going to be for any person, any resource person to fight a case like that, but how incredibly hard it is for a person who is living in poverty or is living with very scant resources to fight a case that mob bosses with $1 million lawyers would have a hard time fighting. To understand how the disparity between what was being thrown at them and what positions they were in to fight it. It was almost like a David and Goliath, situation. But from those conversations that we had with moms, a couple of organizers, cop watchers, people from the community who were just like saw this and said, no, this was wrong. And we remember seeing it in 2014, and there were several takedowns during that time. Between 2014 and 2016, there was a huge expansion of the amount of gang takedowns the police did. And then this one was so big and involved the federal government that we started to have meetings. I remember meeting in basements in the Bronx, moms just sitting down, trying to figure out. And at that point, there were not even lawyers in those meetings because people were just trying to get a sense of what had happened, who was involved. Did we need to write letters to people in prison just to get a sense of, what they needed, what they were being charged with? Getting information alone was really difficult. And so from those conversations came like a loose network of people that started to like try to organize around this. We did a couple of rallies. We did rallies down at the federal correction, where they were being held. I think it's MCC or MDC, downtown Manhattan, right next to the courthouses. We started to try, this is where I met Anthony and the great people at the Legal Aid Society, who started to give us, I think, a lot more understanding of what we were dealing with legally. All of these people needed legal help with. They were being hit three ways. One was the actual day of the takedown, right? The obvious traumatic experience of the takedown when someone comes, knocks in your door and takes your loved one away for God knows how long. But the other one was before. They had been surveilled, they had been watched, they had these cases being built on them for years, and they didn't know, but that was also happening. And then the third one was afterwards, everything that happens after the takedown, right? The takedown is traumatic. People, I remember talking to grandmothers who had guns pointed in their faces, little girls who peed on themselves because of how terrifying the operation was. But afterwards actually came the longer fight, which is all of the legal uncertainty and all of the legal drama, the court cases, the sentencing for people, the pressures to take plea deals, the pressures to provide testimony against people you might have grown up with, right? Whether that testimony was even true or not, right? People were being forced to help build cases against people they had grown up with their entire lives. So all of that was yet to come. So those are the three ways that people were affected by the takedowns. And I just remember talking to people and saying, okay, we need to kind of figure out what we can do to help this case, to triage what's happening. And there were several people there, and some people were facing different charges than others, trying to make an understanding of this, understanding how people who are co-defendants are not allowed to be represented by the same attorneys. What is it called? The concept, Anthony. anyway, it's a way to basically, let's say, like, no, everyone has to have their own counsel. And so like you couldn't reach out
The
to
conflict of interest.
right? People were conflicted off of cases, right? So like a great legal provider like Legal Aid Society can only represent one person on a case, or the Bronx Defenders, or whoever it might be. And so a lot of people were forced to take 18B lawyers and all types of, so the cases were fragmented by design, right? The way that people took on their cases. And so understanding all of this and saying like, okay, well, law enforcement is trying to divide everyone. It's trying to get people to snitch on one another, or to tell, or to testify against one another. What can we do? We can organize amongst ourselves, try to build some sort of solidarity amongst the family members that are left, but also understanding that the people who are in best position to understand what happened to them, or they might have something to help themselves, they're behind bars, and they're being pressured to take these plea deals. So we really had to organize with moms, sometimes dads. Taylon came through as a father who was affected 2 years prior. He came and talked to moms and like gave them an understanding of like, this is what you're going to deal with. This is how the first few months are going to be. And so that was really instructive and important for them. And really letting them as family members just talk was really, really important to get a sense. Because I soon found out there was no quick fix for this. There wasn't like you can call some, high-priced lawyer and have your case fixed. There were really complex charges. There were really difficult cases by themselves. And so getting people to start talking, getting people to also start saying, we can do something, we can hold rallies, we can go speak out, we can talk to legal organizations. And really from those conversations, we were able to start to have convenings behind closed doors to speak with legal practitioners who gave everyone a better sense of what we were dealing with, or what were the reasonable expectations of what could happen. And then part of that was also the organizers to be able to say, okay, well, let's try to organize some kind of sustained effort here, because this isn't going to be something that's going to be solved in 2 or 3 meetings, right? We need to be able to stay in contact with one another, to set up some sort of network, to set up email chains, text chains, anything that we can to just stay in contact with one another, provide support for one another. Even if it's emotional support, it's really, really went a long way for people. And then unfortunately, because that wasn't the only takedown of that year, there were other takedowns, there were other places that we had to go and talk to people and keep trying to build these relationships with. And that's really what it was about for a long time. It was building relationships, talking to people, and also understanding that, these people are facing some of the most difficult moments of their lives, right? Like these cases are super, super complex, and that often result in many, many years of incarceration in their sentencing. So dealing with people who are who are basically in a pressure cooker, right? Family members who are trying to communicate with their loved ones on the inside, which is very difficult, and trying to make the best decisions, and also trying to organize on the outside, and help them out and be their voice on the outside while these people are on the inside. It was both, beautiful and also horrible, because it was horrible that people had to do this, but it was beautiful to see people come together and get together and say, this is the worst thing that they can do to us, but we're not gonna just roll over, right? We're gonna fight this as best we can, whether it's communicating. And then we had tons of meetings with different people. We would talk to people, anyone who would talk to us to get a sense of what could be done. And so we tried to get moms to meet with council members and elected officials to see if they can help. We had meetings with several different legal organizations to try to get a sense of what they thought of what could be done. This was, again, something really, really complex. It was much, much more complex than anything that I had dealt with. I had organized for years around stop and frisk. When things had happened with, a police officer killing someone, there's a kind of a way people organize around that, right? There's usually a clear goal of either, some sort of accountability with the police officer, or some sense of justice, or some sense of a goal. In this, it was not clear how to get people out of these situations. It was not clear, and it still to this day is not clear how to get people out of the situation. People need legal help, and they need to be able to, I think, have access to people who will provide answers to them. And sometimes answers aren't so easy. So a lot of those meetings were really informative for us as organizers, for them as parents, to get a sense of where we were at. And then we kind of figured out over the years that this was going to be a long-term fight, and we needed to go beyond just having a network of people who are on an email thread or on a text chain. We needed to actually form some sort of more formal coalition for the long term, because this was going to be something that we were going to have to fight for the long term. We needed to build up organizing strength. We needed to build up legal knowledge and know-how and expertise. We needed to have parents be able to be involved for the long haul. And so that's kind of the genesis of what the Gangs Coalition came to be, is a reflection of our desire to kind of have this long-term collection of people and parents. I can't stress enough parents, who are dealing with this, because a lot of them have other kids they have to help, and they have families that they have to support. They have households that they need to provide stability for. And they also have to be everything for their child or for their loved one. They have to be the person who's calling the lawyers, their appointed lawyers. They have to be the person that has to deal with the issue of, if I raise my concerns in the media or in the public, is my son going to be retaliated against? Which is something that we came across with one mother whose son was being held in an isolation for a long time, we believe, based off of the fact that she was being vocal about what had happened. We had to also deal with the fact that when your child or when your loved one is gang alleged, that there's a certain sense, there's less people, or there's less ears that are willing to hear out your story, right? There is something about the word gang that unfortunately does something to reduce people's solidarity with you, or to see you as human, or to see your case as something that's worthy of being called an injustice, because just the word alone was a way to kind of take that humanity away from them. So we had those meetings, and we had those spaces, and we had a great convening. I think it was probably 2017 that we also did at John Jay with Anthony and a bunch of the people that we organized with, where we also got to talk with people from Chicago, from California, I think from even Rhode Island, people who were dealing with this gang policing, gang takedown issue all across the country. We had someone there from London, I think, or we had a couple of conversations with people from London who were there, who were dealing with something similar across the Atlantic or the Pacific, or whatever that body of oceans. So they were also dealing with this. And so it feels very isolating, but then when you start to talk to people, and West Coast people had an amazing grasp of this because they had been dealing with this for so long. I learned a lot. As a matter of fact, a lot of the things that I think we were trying to kind of have lessons learned from things that had happened in California. We knew about the database issue in CalGang. This is one of the ways that we started to target our database and say, like, there's clear errors in it. There's police officers at the helm, so there's going to be a lot of abuse by the police and how they even track this as a quote unquote data mechanism. Chicago had a bunch of great organizing that was happening around this. And actually, one of the hashtags that we do it in solidarity with a hashtag they were using a few years back, Erase the Database. We use that when we're talking about our campaigns with the gang database here. So we've learned a lot of lessons, and we've helped people get connected based off of, I think, this idea that even though it's happening to you and it feels like it's just happening to you, this is actually a bigger issue. And this is an issue that that if we can connect on across, boroughs, across cities, across the country, that's something that's a place that we can build power at. And I think for me, when I started to see this as a long-term fight. like not just like a few months or even a few years, but like several years or an undetermined amount of time, because this issue unfortunately isn't going away. And even though we've done organizing to kind of make this issue a lot harder for the police to kind of do so freely, we still see that it's still an uphill battle. As much as we've done, and Anthony can tell you, we've done a lot of rallying, we've done a lot of meetings, we've done a lot of advocacy, we've done, I think there's no stone we haven't turned, that it's still an uphill battle because of how much power police and prosecutors are afforded when the word gang is thrown out there. It's to me, as a writer, not even as an organizer, as a writer, it's probably the most underestimated criminal justice issue of our time. Just how much police get away with when the word gang is thrown out there. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And I'll just play this short video. I was actually gonna play it in the beginning to give you a sense of, first, Taylon. I want you guys to see Taylon. He's one of our great parent organizers. He's been doing this for all these years, and he's also been dealing with his son's case, which I can't imagine how hard that is, but also how it led to us actually having the parents and people testify at the city council hearing that Anthony mentioned earlier. Police had been doing this for years with no accountability, no questions asked. And then because of the organizing and because of the parents that were consistently fighting what the police were saying, we were able to force, they didn't give it to us. We forced a city council hearing where we were able to actually make the police commissioner have to come, or not the police commissioner then, he's now the police commissioner, the chief of detectives, come and have to explain what they were doing. And it was the first time that they had to do this, which for us was at the time a major victory, because we couldn't even get anyone to acknowledge that what they were doing to people under the banner of fighting gangs was even a problem. It was such a slam dunk for people, for the police, that no one in the media, no political leaders, unfortunately, questioned anything that they did. If it was a gang takedown, it was all seen as 100% positive. This was an absolute win for the community. As Anthony mentioned, like, it's a favor that we're doing to your community to quote unquote clean up the community. And no one had questions about the people and the human beings involved in it. So this is the hearing, and I'll just bring up on my share screen. And you'll also see a little bit of Taylon, who again is one of the most amazing people I've met.
Police officers went into an apartment that they raided, and a young boy was crying because his brother was being arrested. And they looked at that young boy and said, "Why are you crying? We'll be back to get you in a couple of years."
That's Taylor Murphy Sr., and he's describing just one of the many instances related to NYPD's gang database. It's what many are calling Stop and Frisk 2.0.
Listen.
This is a city council hearing in New York City. The topic that's on everyone's mind today is what many activists are calling Stop and Frisk 2.0, gang databases.
For the last couple of years, on newspapers and in press conferences by the NYPD, all we've heard is the police side of things.
Most of the news focused on the chief of detective's testimony, which was his attempt to justify the use of gang databases. He relied heavily on wide generalizations of the neighborhoods they policed, along with the prevailing fear that the crime of the 70s and 80s might return to New York. But right now, we're going to focus on these two.
State your name for the record.
This is Miss Smith.
My name is Miss Smith.
And who you're representing.
And this is Taylor Murphy Sr.
My name is Taylor Murphy. I'm representing the people.
He's lost 2 children due to the activities at NYPD's gang database.
I'm also the father of Tayshana Chicken Murphy, young lady that was killed in West Harlem.
Her murder directly relates to one of the major gang raids in 2014. It led to over 100 arrests. It was all because of the 2 men who were convicted of her murder were also part of Money Avenue. Side note, Murphy later teamed up with the mother of one of the men who killed his daughter in order to form an anti-gun violence campaign. call both sides of the gun.
They might have been gang related, but their actions were their own actions. They were individuals. I'm also the father of a young man named Taylor Murphy Jr. Right now is currently doing 50 years to life for his alleged involvement with this conspiracy in West Harlem.
People barely out of middle school who are being added to the gang database. And there are more than one, there are several.
Just the idea of having 13-year-olds and 15-year-olds placed in databases without any help or without parents being informed about it is very troubling.
While the police department maintains that being a member of a gang is not a crime, being included on its database can have several collateral consequences. The Legal Aid Society criticized the use of gang databases, saying that they're over-inclusive and inaccurate, and they pose a lot of pre-trial obstacles for people who are inaccurately held or labeled as a gang member. In 2011, a survey of over 60 public and private defense attorneys in more than 40 jurisdictions nationwide revealed that 90% of attorneys said the question of gang affiliation had come up during bail hearings. 60% said their clients would have been released if it not had been for the allegations by prosecutors of gang affiliation. And 2/3 of the attorneys said that they had seen substantially higher bail set due to claims of gang affiliation. Want to know something weird? You don't have to commit a crime to be on a gang database. You don't even have to be suspected of committing a crime. If you meet any of the following criteria that I'm about to list, then that means that NYPD can qualify you as a gang member. If he or she admits to the membership during debriefing, or through the course of investigation, an individual is reasonably believed to belong to a gang and is identified as such by 2 independent sources, being seen at spots frequented by alleged gang members, scars, tattoos associated with gangs, gang-related documents, hand signs, colors associated with gangs, like red, blue, green, yellow, black, white, gray, purple. Listen, you can kind of see where people get a little bit uneasy about this. A known gang location can be the projects, or a bodega, or a basketball court. This is one of the biggest criticisms against it. It's too vague. Living in these neighborhoods, anyone can be a gang member.
How do you surveil a community for 4 years and do no type of intervention? In my daughter's second trial, it was a second trial, this trial of the New York State against Robert Cartagena. A Viper Room officer who watched the cameras said, and I quote, that he's seen 2 young men come out of a building with a firearm. And he also said he's seen them menace another group of individuals with that firearm. If we are supposed to be surveilling and intercepting crimes, why weren't them young men stopped? What happened was them young men were able to walk across the street, past 2 buildings, chase my daughter and my son into a building where they locked the door, where they closed the door, thought it was locked, that's a whole nother story, and caught her on the 4th floor and shot her down like a dog. Then it was a snowball effect. A chain of events that happened that led up to 103 individuals being arrested. Where is the accountability? This person seeing this on the camera and not coming to stop those individuals when they were menacing somebody with a firearm. Where is the accountability with NYPD and accepting the fact that that whole incident and this whole saga could have been stopped before it started? Why am I sitting here when I should be sitting in Madison Square Garden watching my daughter play in the WNBA? There's some real fundamental issues and there's some real fundamental flaws in what we are dealing with. And if we don't start putting integrity, morality, and the people first, we are going to have some more serious issues.
All right. So I just wanted to share that, and I know we're getting a little short on time. I wanted to get you guys a sense of at least one of our parent leaders who's been amazing, who's been with us to this day, really helping us set the tone, set the pace for everything that we do, Taylon. And I just wanted to also just leave some time for questions. If anybody has any questions or comments, I guess just raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can put it into the chat. And I also just want to acknowledge Professor Howell Babe, who just who jumped on. It's also been a really great resource for us. Hey, Babe.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Hey,
Sorry, I watched the other one a little bit and then moved over here. Good to see you.
Save the best for last. Yeah. Babe has been, just for me, a really great resource to help me understand kind of like just some of the big picture concepts of conspiracy and all the things that go into some of the charges that they put on these people.
And had also been a great resource to help families, impacted families, with questions they've had about their cases and what's going on with certain issues, how best to find support for their children, and yeah, just an amazing overall. Because like you said, Josmar, the complexities behind these cases and sometimes the realities that they don't end up, let's say, with our organization or with another public defender, but rather end up with federal defenders, makes it so that those of us seeking to empower community members and whose most immediate and urgent question is about the case in front of them, in front of their children, is sometimes not within our immediate wheelhouse. So anybody who can come and help us with that, and Babe has always been there.
Yeah.
So somebody new is on the phone now, on the call now, is Meredith Manchester too, from Philadelphia, and it all starts with the kind of work that she's doing too, just like looking at these cases really carefully and asking lots and lots of questions. I don't know if Anthony, you already shared the Foil Yourself campaign, but you know, we wouldn't be able to force any of this either without first like me doing general freedom of information law request and then individuals saying, what's my information? One of the biggest challenges with family members though is, you know, they do call with question, and it's very frustrating because we don't have the resources or connects to just give them a lawyer. Oftentimes they're denied any kind of bail, so we can't get them out. So that's one really big challenge of organizing on these issues, because, you know, the affected family members are so important to our work, but it's really, really hard to support them. Like, we're trying to change the big picture, but we struggle to find any way of being helpful with cases. Like, we have written letters of support for bail. We recently wrote for a guy in immigration detention, but I did just come from the community, defense model where it's participatory defense. New York is so big though, that even if you have groups of people from the community, you know, we really need someone from this block, from this housing project to say, like, I know this neighborhood, this crew makes music, this crew makes videos, this crew plays ball, you know, that you need someone who really knows to debunk like the terrible narratives they put out there. But still, we're getting there. I mean, I feel like we're moving. It's becoming a topic for for elected candidates, for council members, for everyone interested in criminal justice, which it was not a decade ago.
Yeah. There's also a question in the chat from Connor I just wanted to highlight before it gets too late. Has court watching been a part of community organizing efforts? That's a great question, because in New York, there was a court watch campaign that was underway a few years ago that I remember we had conversations about that as well. Like, could we do something like that similarly, but for gang cases? Because the court watching wasn't specific to gang cases, and gang cases. The problem with court watching is that most of these cases don't go to trial. You can go to hearings, you can go, I mean, obviously we haven't been able to go to a hearing for the last 18 months, but you can go to hearings, but many people take plea deals. And so there isn't, there isn't as many opportunities to be able to go and see what's happening in court, because most people take plea deals. And I think that's true for both local and federal cases. I think the majority of these people do take plea deals. So, I went to a couple of cases. One was Talon's son's case. I remember going to the majority of that trial. And actually, I wrote about it in Truth Out a few years ago. And in court, it's really horrible. You get to see kind of the how they make the sausage, right, for these cases. It's just social media posts. There's often a lack, and in that case, it was a complete lack of any physical evidence, any video, anything that you would call, like I as a layperson would call like real evidence. I went to the trial of Donnell Murray, whose mom works with us. She was in the video a little bit in the beginning. That was a federal case, and it boggled my mind, like how little evidence that they have and how much punishment they can inflict with such little evidence. And there was another case of Ronnie Williams, and I wrote about for HuffPost a few years ago. That was a Brooklyn case, and that one as well. No physical evidence. There was just a lot of innuendo, Facebook posts, and it's really like they're just putting like the gang on trial. So the court watch, I think, is something that we still are trying to consider, especially now as we come out of the pandemic, or we're starting to come out of the pandemic. We should definitely be in those spaces, but it's hard because the cases aren't really designed for the government to have to really prove their case. And even when they prove their case, they're not using what I would call evidence.
I also want to acknowledge, I believe Marie had a question earlier that it kind of just went up on the chat about the criminalization, like being included in the database and the connection that it has to employment and jobs. And in the Follow Yourself campaign, we have encountered people who have told us, like I was told that I was included in the database and I was denied employment. It was with a city agency. They think they were applying to be a part of the school safety agent, and it came up in that context. We immediately flagged it and stayed connected with the person and with submitting the actual FOIL. But most of the collateral consequences that we see have to do with the pretrial issues, the enhancement of the sentencing, also in the context of immigration, where the label itself lands somebody in removal or deportation proceedings, and the including or asking for higher amounts of bail. And just as Josmar was speaking about earlier, just the label itself, when it's on the complaint, when somebody is facing that label itself, it's almost like they're facing they're already facing higher charges, but they're facing like a whole nother component to the case that is already tainting everything that they're trying to push against. And so that's how we've seen the label come up in the consequences that it creates for people, among some of them, including also losing your housing, education opportunities.
Yeah. And I think we're actually, the time has crept up on us. I know we're at the end now, and our moderator here is also telling us to if you're interested in keeping the conversation going, you can go over to Kumo Space. And I think most of you should have the information on how to do that. But thank you guys all for spending some